Hi everyone, my name is Meredith Copeland. I am a first year graduate student at the University of Florida studying mental health counseling. So today I'm going to discuss with you racism, what is race-based trauma, and we're going to discuss how white people can be good allies and how we can help. So I'm going to begin this talk by talking about race-based trauma. And to do that, first we have to start with the definition of trauma. The American Psychological Association defines trauma as a disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, confusion, and any other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behavior, and other aspects of functioning. So, trauma examples could be a rape, an attempted murder. Those are what we call big T traumas. But then there are what we call little t traumas, such as bullying, neglect, and examples of racism. Trauma manifests in a lot of different ways in different people. Some examples may include increased anxiety, changes in mood, changes in appetite, changes in sleep, difficulty thinking ahead, feeling overwhelmed, being exhausted, having a brain fog, and hypervigilance, so feeling like you can never relax, you're always looking over your shoulder. So those are some examples of how trauma may manifest. I love this quote. We heard it in our trauma class, and I'm not sure who the author is, I couldn't find it, but trauma is a normal response to an abnormal set of circumstances. So we are not meant to go through these sorts of experiences. So when we have these really negative experiences, our reactions are normal. What is abnormal is the circumstances we were put in. As many of you may know, trauma, if not treated, not processed properly, can develop into PTSD, which can cause severe challenges in functioning. So now that we've learned what trauma is, we're going to discuss racism. Racism has been a very hot topic ever since the tragic killing of George Floyd. So I know for me, and I'm sure a lot of other white people can relate, when we think of racism, we think of people with their KKK hoods and their Nazi flags and screaming the N-word, and that's what I used to think of when I think of racism. And of course that is racist, but that's not all that racism is. There's overt racism, like the example I just gave. And then there's covert racism, which is much smaller, and that comes from our preconceived notions that we may not even be aware we have. For example, imagine you're a black man walking down the street and you see a white woman and she grabs her child a little closer, or she clutches her purse a little closer, because she may not even realize that she's been taught to perceive you as a threat. That's covert racism. Unfortunately, slavery ended a long time ago. Us white kids were taught in school Martin Luther King got rid of racism, and there's no more racism, and that could not be further from the truth. According to a study done by Dr. DeGue and colleagues, black people were 3 times as likely as white people to die at the hands of police. And despite being 13% of the population, make up nearly 30% of the killings at the hands of police. And that was what sparked the outrage at the George Floyd murder, because it was just another black man being killed, being denied his right to a trial, being denied his innocent until proven guilty. And that's where the outrage came from. But to black, indigenous people of color, this is nothing new to them. They have been living with this fear of the police. They have to train their kids differently. When us white kids get raised, we get taught you listen to the police, you call the police when you need them. People of color get taught when the cops show up, you put your hands on the wheel and you ask for permission to reach for your license and registration, or else they might think you're pulling out a gun and they might see you as a threat and you might die. Very different way that white people and people of color have to talk to their children about the police. So that's one example of how something that us white people take for granted negatively affects the mental health of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In addition to the police, people of color also have to think about their economic struggles. So there's a practice called redlining, and it's defined as a practice that puts services, financial or otherwise, out of the reach of residents of certain areas based on race or ethnicity. It can be seen in the systematic denial of mortgages, insurances, loans, and other financial services. Notably, the policy of redlining is felt the most by residents of minority neighborhoods. So what they're doing is drawing lines around where the minority groups live and denying them access to financial services. So they just cannot get ahead. According to the Washington Post, in 2016, which was just 4 years ago, the median household wealth for a white family was $149,000. The average household wealth for a Black family was $13,000. And you can see in the graph, as the white line of wealth goes up over the years, the Black one stays pretty stagnant. Part of the reason, in addition to the redlining, in addition to the financial disparities, is because Black people and people of color are less likely to be hired. I know someone who used to work as a hiring manager at a fast food restaurant, and his co-worker, the hiring manager who worked with him, used to look at applications and say, their name's too Black, throw it in the trash. And that's a situation that I know of personally. Imagine the thousands of companies, more than that, that are doing the same thing. And these people don't have a chance. They don't even get to the interview process because their name sounds too Black. And this is reflected in an article by Valerie Wilson in the Economic Policy Institute that states that African American workers have an unemployment rate twice that of white people. So with all these points in mind, let's revisit the definition of trauma for a second. Trauma is any disturbing experience that results in fear, helplessness, confusion, and other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting impact on a person's attitudes. If you're being raised in a society that won't let you get ahead financially, you have more fear of the police because the color of your skin means you're more likely to get murdered at the hands of people who are supposed to serve and protect you. That is race-based trauma. And that's not even to mention the covert and overt racism you may experience at the hands of your peers, colleagues, and strangers. So that is what race-based trauma is. This article I found, I'm not sure if I'm going to say her name right, by Dr. Polanco-Roman and colleagues, found that in a nationally representative sample of adults in the United States, racial discrimination was associated with major depressive disorder, substance abuse disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Looking at all these circumstances, it's pretty easy to understand why. So, what do we do about it? We were taught in our trauma class how to process trauma, how to get people through their traumatic experiences so that they can go on to live relatively normal lives. The first thing we learned, and my professor stressed this very much, is to make sure the person is safe. So, for example, if you come into me and you're in an inter-partner violence situation, I'm not going to process the last time your partner beat you until I know that you're out of the hands of your partner. You need to be safe physically and emotionally before we start to process your trauma. This makes it really, really difficult with race-based trauma because it's seemingly nonstop. Unfortunately, a Black client is going to have repeated instances of racism in their life. So it makes it very difficult to begin to process trauma. This doesn't mean it's impossible. We'll figure out ways to do it, teaching the client to advocate for themselves and stick up for themselves and have a strong sense of identity are good protectors, and having a good support system is a good protection. But I'm just pointing out that in normal situations of trauma, the traumatic incident ends and then you can process, and that's not the case with race-based trauma. So now, if you're watching this and you're white, you're probably having the same question in your head that I've had in my head this whole time. What the hell do we do? And I definitely feel that helplessness as well. But there are tangible goals that we're working towards. So, the Black Lives Matter movement has been the subject of debate, but what they're advocating for when they say defund the police, they're not saying no police. They're saying take some of the money from the police and advocate it towards mental health services, social services, rehabilitation, so that there is less emphasis on prisons and police and more of an emphasis on social systems, because we know that crime comes from an economic need. So if we can stop that, if we can help people get out of their economic hardships, we can stop a lot of the crime before it starts. How can us white people be good allies? Swallow your pride and realize it's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about us. It's about our Black, Indigenous people of color, brothers and sisters. And they are our brothers and sisters. We are the same species. So we have to hold space for them and listen to them and believe their stories. And we don't have the right, if someone says, this happened to me because of my skin color, we do not have the right to say, oh, it wasn't your skin color. We don't know that. They have had a lot of experiences that have taught them that the color of their skin affects how they get by in life. So we don't have that power to deny them of that. That is belittling, that is gaslighting. We need to believe them, take them at their word, let them know we are here for them, we support them, and we're fighting for them. At the same time, and this is something I've struggled with too, we need to teach ourselves what they unfortunately have had to grow up knowing. I will attach in the description below a bunch of movies, books you can read and watch. I watched the documentary 13th on Netflix, and it really helps put into perspective how the system, how our government has banked on white supremacy by keeping the narrative that Black people are violent, and how that's helped the white supremacist society grow, and where all these narratives come from. It was really, really eye-opening, really sad, but we need to know this stuff in order to change it. History is going to continue to repeat itself unless we learn and make it better. Hold yourself accountable. I did not get the chance to read Dr. Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, because it is sold out on Amazon. But I watched a video where she spoke about it on YouTube, and she discussed the topic of white fragility. So that means that white people are taught to shy away from conversations about race. So we don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to that's not doing anyone any good. And back to the duality of racism. Racism, again, is not just people with their KKK hoods and their swastika flags. Racism is the side-eye looks, the exclusion, the job exclusion, all that stuff is also racism. The jokes that us white people think are harmless are really causing a lot more harm than we realize. So, and we are raised with these beliefs because of the white supremacist system. So if someone calls you out for being racist, it does not mean you are a bad person. And that is Dr. DiAngelo's point. It means you have work to do. So what you need to do, if someone calls you out on your racism, accept it, apologize, work to do better. Even Dr. DiAngelo pointed out her years of researching this stuff. She still has accidentally made comments that have caused harm to her black colleagues. You are always growing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You just made a bad statement. But in order to be a good person and be a good ally, you need to learn and grow. Hold each other accountable. If you hear something that is a little offensive, call them out on it before they say it in front of a person of color and cause harm to them. Alright, so I believe that is everything. We discussed racism, trauma, race-based trauma, how Black, Indigenous, and people of color's mental health is negatively affected by the society we live in, and what us white people can do about it. There is a lot of work that still needs to be done. There's a lot of learning that needs to be done, but I think a shift in society is happening, and that gives me a lot of hope, and I hope that maybe you learned something from this video or will watch and read some of the stuff down there and continue to educate yourselves. Just keep fighting, keep being there for each other. Keep on loving each other in this time that's so crazy and so dark. That's all we can do. Alright, have a great day. Thanks for watching.